Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here. So today I wanted to talk about Reaper mode, and I delved into this before in prior videos, but it's a topic you see somewhat regularly, I think, on the forums, so it's worth responding to, and I figured this would be a good opportunity for me to just kind of expand and give my whole 2 cents, my whole spiel on Reaper mode and why it is the way it is, and why we shouldn't remove what this poster is asking for, which is the self-healing debuff. So, and this is not to respond, to this person, one person in particular. This is just kind of my general thoughts on this topic. All right. So this person says, "Dear devs, grouping should not be about fun. Grouping should be about fun and entertainment. Players should not have to group for endgame simply because of a nasty mechanism. At this stage of the game, veteran players who enjoy solo endgame for non-raid quests should not feel they are being isolated and alienated. I know a lot of them has chosen to stay AFK at the moment, mostly because of this annoying mechanism. Please kindly consider this." Okay, so really to explain why I feel the way I do about Reaper, I feel like I need to go back and give a little bit of a history lesson, I guess you could say. So let's go back to update 23. So update 23, if you don't remember or if you weren't around, was the update that was all about updating Necro 4. So that was the update that gave us all epic versions of the Necro 4 quest, Mark of Death, and this was a stage in the game where Reaper didn't exist yet. So we just had epic, normal, hard, and elite. And this was also the update that gave us armor up, which if you don't remember, armor wasn't too useful in the game before that, except for if you're going for like a super high AC tank. Armor was kind of all or nothing at one point in the game, and it was that update they changed armor to be more meaningful for people. So you would actually wear it. A lot of people we had a period in DDO where everyone would just wear robes because it didn't make sense to wear heavy armor. So let's go back to that update, and this was really the one for me where it was really apparent that DDO needed to do something about challenging players more, because when this update hit, a lot of people, myself included, were going through in groups on Epic Elite, and it just wasn't very challenging for a lot of people. I think we reached a point in the game where we'd seen a lot of power creep and just a lot of, I guess, inflation from a lot of things they had put, new abilities and things they had put into the game, and we just reached a point where we needed more difficulty in DDO, so they had to come up with a way to challenge players more. So basically, if you want to challenge players more at this point, you only have a handful of options. So you can nerf player power, which, as we all know, isn't going to happen. I mean, nerfs are never well received, and particularly if they did large-scale nerfs to major mechanics that had already been in the game. And I think some mechanics that particularly were responsible for this lack of challenge at this point in the game were things that have already been well established in DDO. They've already been around for years, and the developers just weren't going to do that because players, frankly, just wouldn't accept it. Okay, so that was something that wasn't off the table. So you've got, I would say, two other options. The other option number 2 is you can make current content harder. Option number 3 is you make a difficulty above what we have now. And that option 3 is what we saw happen in the long run, but option 2 is what they tried at first. So they tried option 2, which was make current content harder. And they did that in update 24, where they introduced monster champions. And when they did that for a while, with the original implementation of the champions, it really made a big difference, and they were quite challenging in hard and elite, the standard modes. But after just a couple days, it was pretty apparent that players weren't going to accept that either. So we had the original monster champions for just a couple days. Actually, way back then, but this is, I don't know, five years ago, something like that. I did a video about this, talking about the monster champions. If you want to dig that video up, you can. But basically what happened is we had a day or two, or a few days, I don't remember exactly. It was a few days of the original monster champions, and we saw an influx of players on the forums. I mean, a huge influx of players, like players we had never commented before on the forums. They blew up the forums. We had 100+ page thread, just a huge wave of people that were really upset. And the players, bottom line is, the player base didn't accept this either. So players didn't want to see current content get harder, because I think the consensus was it felt like it was a punishment, because say you're going after a bunch of past lives, why would, like, you're not getting more rewards for that, so you would be doing more work for the same reward, as opposed to players who had done those past lives before the monster champion change. So essentially what happened is very quickly after that implementation, the devs put out a statement saying, okay, we heard you loud and clear, and they nerfed champions in in the standard difficulties, like hard and elite, down to a point where they really didn't. I mean, yeah, they provide some extra challenge, but they really, really watered them down to where they're really not. I would say they're not really a major threat in hard and elite. Obviously, they are in Reaper. I'm not saying this applies to Reaper, but I would say in the standard modes, they really watered down how much of a threat they were. So essentially, that meant that option number 2 was off the table, as I talked about before. So option 1 again was nerf players. Option 2 was increase the power of monsters and current content. So 1 and 2 were off the table. So they had to go with number 3, which ended up being the Reaper mode, which we saw ways down the line, we saw implemented eventually. Okay, so now that we've established that you got to do a difficulty above elite to challenge players, because this is the only thing really that players are going to accept. How do they go about doing that? Well, and what can they do to challenge players? So they had to put this penalty on self-healing, and now we're getting around to actually the topic. They had to put this penalty of self-healing on players because, frankly, self-healing had gotten too good in DDO to the point where they really couldn't challenge players in interesting ways without doing that. So, for example, if you in DDO, a lot of classes have access to, say, like quicken repairs, self-healing, or quicken healing. And not all classes, for sure, like melees especially, don't really get this. But for the most part, your divines and your arcanes can get these quick self-heals. So how do you challenge players who have access to these super good, instantly fill your hotbar type abilities that can't be interrupted? Well, if that exists, then the only way to really challenge players, if self-healing is that good in the game, generally, and I know some people can still do this in Reaper mode, but generally, if that's the norm, then the only way to challenge players is through uninteresting mechanics, like one-shotting, and that's just not fun. It's not interesting, and players don't like that either, and that's just not good game design. Players don't like that. It's not fun. It's not interesting to have one-shot mechanics, or to have, say, like monster DCs to the point where you have to make your save or you just can't play that content. So that's not interesting. So when you take into account that with this self-healing being this good, there really was not an interesting way to challenge players, they really had to do this self-healing debuff because there's just no other way to make damage matter. So if you have a monster that's hitting you for 10% of your HP each hit, or 5% of your HP, or whatever, it's not really a threat if you can just instantly self-heal yourself. But if you can only heal yourself, a small percentage instead at a time, then it becomes much more of a threat. Also, Reaper's goal was not just to be hard. The secondary goal was to encourage party play, and this is the one that I think that this poster in particular, and a lot of people more object to, because they don't like feeling forced to group. And Reaper does have an element of that for sure, where it really forces you to group. And you don't have to group. Certainly there are people who solo Reaper and can do it competently, but a lot of players can't, especially if you're not running on a really good build or have really good gear. So, and also I think there is some legitimacy to this argument, just because, even though it's not one I agree with personally, just because the game in the past has seen a lot less in terms of population, and more and more spread out. We're going to get more spread out coming forward this year because they're going to do a level cap increase. So, and we already have too many servers that need to be merged. So I see where they're getting there, where it's hard to have parties interact with you. Also, with the self-healing penalty, when it comes to grouping, the self-healing penalty makes it so healers, support characters, those builds make sense. So it makes the game encourage more of a variety of builds, rather than what we saw in the past with a lot of, really the only way to build a character was to have a self-healing DPS character. And that's still, I would say, true to an extent in DDO, but it certainly is a lot better now, because now, as opposed to before Reaper, it's a lot more viable to run a support character. So Reaper groups actually like to have dedicated healing characters. Okay, next point is Reaper mode is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be really hard. So it's fair for them to put up these self-healing penalties, even if at the end of the day it was arbitrary. I still think it's fair for the I don't think it is arbitrary, but even if it was, it's still fair for the developers to put forward these debuffs just because they want to challenge players, and this is a pretty effective way to challenge players. There is one other, also just to argue on the other side here, I think there is one pretty good argument. I don't agree with it, but I can see where players are coming from when they mention Reaper and why they want the self-healing penalty to go away, because a lot of them might say that the Reaper rewards are so good that it feels required that you actually run Reaper. And I think there is some elements of truth to that, because a lot of your viability really comes down to those Reaper hit points. They really make a difference in terms of your viability for your character. And I think the developers did make a mistake in implementing Reaper, and it's my one major criticism of Reaper mode in DDO is that they made the rewards too good. You need to have some rewards there and to encourage players to run the content, because if there was no rewards for Reaper, people wouldn't run it. But at the same time, I think the rewards they gave, they just went too far with it. I think that the current HP bonuses that affect you outside of Reaper mode really should be a fraction of what they are. I think that players would still grind Reaper mode for an additional, I don't know, max of 60 or 70 hit points, as opposed to what we have now, which is hundreds of extra hit points you can get outside of Reaper mode by grinding the Reaper points. So I think that Reaper mode does feel required at some point to advance a character. But again, there's a couple. The reason I don't really agree with that argument is because there's a couple things you can do. Like, you don't have to group in Reaper. Like, you can solo Reaper 1. A lot of players do it. Granted, a lot of players aren't going to be able to do that, but you can work your way up to it. You can grind gear. You can fix your build. You can do reincarnations to increase your character's power to make it easier for you to solo Reaper 1. So there's things you can do to work up to soloing Reaper 1, even if you can't currently. And also, even if you can't solo Reaper 1, even if you just have 1 or 2 people in your group, that can make it significantly easier in Reaper mode to complete. So you don't necessarily have to even solo it. But it's also fair in an MMO that's about, it's a massively multiplayer game that's about grouping. It's fair to require it to some extent, I think. And so I don't want to see DDO get to the point where we used to be, where it didn't make a lot. You may as well just solo stuff, which I think was the case for not a lot of players, but for some players, I think felt that way, particularly players that were really veterans who really knew the quests really well and could run them really fast, and who ran powerful builds that could solo stuff efficiently, that could really clear out mobs effectively and quickly, probably felt that way at some point. So it's fair for there to be reasons to actually group in a game like DDO. So that's why I don't really agree with that. But so at the end of the day, the bottom line here is that there are 2 goals of Reaper, and that's to, 1, be difficult and challenging, and 2, to encourage party play. And the reason the self-healing buff exists and needs to stay is because that's the only effective way they can add challenge and encourage grouping in an interesting way. Okay, so that's bottom line why it needs to stay and why it should stay, and I think most players agree with that. And I think, as you saw in this thread, most players seem to respond by saying that no, you need to keep the self-healing penalty there. So guys, that's my 2 cents on this. Sorry for the little bit of long-winded history of DDO rambling, but I wanted to just share my thoughts on that. And it's something I have talked about in the past, as I said before, but this topic just brought up thoughts of that, and I wanted to just get it out. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Comment below and tell me if you disagree with me, whatever. I'm always open to criticism, so feel free to do that. That's going to be it for this video, guys. I will see you next time. Have a good one and take care.